Hello and welcome to Empire of Wargames. My name is Cplash and today we are going to compare the three Slaanesh chariot variants: the Seeker Chariot, the Hellflayer and the Exalted Seeker Chariot. We will see which one is the best depending on scenario, and we will see which one of them is most points efficient. Stay tuned. What is the role of chariots? Chariots dish out a ton of attacks while being insanely fast. In my mind, the job of a chariot is to kill as many targets as possible while forcing enemy ranged units into melee. Meanwhile, your big demonette bombs run down the table to get to their destination. Both the Seeker Chariot and the Exalted Seeker Chariot are great against hordes, while the Hellflayer has a decent shot at destroying higher toughness targets. Other than that, here are some general numbers before we go into each chariot individually. For heavy support, we have a Seeker Chariot, which costs 60 points in its regular version, and 95 points if you want a Seeker Chariot with Herald. The other heavy support choice is an Exalted Seeker Chariot for 80 points, and its HQ variant costs 130 points. And in the fast attack slot, you have the Hellflayer with the HQ costing 105 points. This means that you could play a full detachment with only chariots, which would be fun to play. Here's the legal list as an example. I wouldn't recommend this for anything competitive, but I'm certain that piloting this list could be genuinely fun. Give it a try if you happen to have enough chariots lying around. I think the rest will be a little bit clearer once we take a closer look at the three units at hand. Alright, let's start with taking a look at the three different datasheets, going from the Seeker Chariot to the Hellflayer, and lastly talking about the Exalted Seeker Chariot. The Seeker Chariot costs 60 points as a heavy support choice, or 95 points for the HQ version. It is the cheapest chariot of the bunch and easy to slot into your army should you only have 60 points left. It being the cheapest is actually a big advantage, considering you can put 6 toughness 5 wounds on the table rather easily, which is not that common for Slaanesh. But compared to the other variants that are only 20 points more expensive, it is the least potent when it comes to dishing out damage. We will look at the tables later on. This model does not bracket. This basically means that its stats do not change depending on how many wounds it has left. Furthermore, this model has the Scything Impact special rule. This gives you another incentive to charge and take the initiative. A word of advice here: if you charge, do not place the model you would normally place it, but instead make sure to position it sideways so it touches as many models as possible, making the most out of this ability. Before looking at the number of attacks that the Seeker Chariot can dish out, let's look at the stratagem Flancing Impact, which is basically the same stratagem for all three chariot variants. It says, use the stratagem in the fight phase, select one Demonette Chariot unit from your army that made a charge move this turn. Until the end of the phase, when resolving an attack made by a model in that unit, an unmodified hit roll of 6 scores 1 additional hit. This basically means that the maximum number of attacks that this chariot can dish out is 15 plus 2.5 with the stratagem, and the minimum is 10 plus 1.5 with the stratagem. The average, which is more likely, will be 12.5, and with the stratagem you will end up with something like 14 or 15 attacks. With 10 attacks minimum and up to 18-ish attacks with the stratagem, it is safe to say that this chariot will melt through toughness 3 or toughness 4 targets with a mediocre armor save. And even Space Marines will have problems if you roll 6s on wound rolls with your piercing claws. But the 3 different weapon profiles make each chariot take its sweet time each turn. I would advise preparing small dice pools for each weapon just so you can go through them quickly. Ideally, you would use 3 different dice colors to make it easy to separate them. Keep in mind, even though that the Lashes of Torment are an assault weapon, you can still use them in melee, so keep using them every turn. Next is the Hellflayer. While technically similar to the Seeker Chariot, it does have some key differences. First up, it takes up a fast attack slot instead of a heavy support slot. Then, when it comes to the targets you want to attack with the Hellflayer, they are wildly different because of its bladed axles. So at first glance, this is 20 points more expensive and just as durable as the Seeker Chariot. But it is the only chariot able to target with strength 8 attacks. These are obviously good against higher toughness targets, but wounding Marines on 2s is not bad either. The big problem with the Hellflayer is that its number of attacks are very volatile. Here are the numbers. Don't worry, I'll show a table comparing the 3 of them in a bit. So the maximum number of attacks can be around 24 or 25-ish, while the minimum number of attacks is 13, with the stratagem, of course. So the numbers of attacks are very, very dependent on how well you roll. The average is fine, it's 16 attacks plus 2.5, not looking at the quality of attacks, of course. As you can see, the disparity between maximum and minimum is quite big. So if you're unlucky, it really sucks, especially if you roll a 1 on those bladed axles. Other than that, it is more expensive and does squish your point for point, while offering a lot more offensive potential, which I really like. And that's it for the health layer. To put it simply, it is more expensive, offers more offensive potential and attacks, but fewer wounds point for point, and it doesn't have the special rule. Last but not least, we have the Exalted Seeker Chariot, which is very similar to the regular Seeker Chariot. It costs 80 points for the non-HQ version, so the same as the health layer, but it is double as tough as the regular Seeker Chariot. We are looking at 12 toughness, 5 wounds. The critical thing here is that the Exalted Seeker Chariot can bracket, so the chariots get worse the fewer wounds it has left. As long as it is on the top bracket though, it is an insane model hitting on 2s with a crazy amount of attacks. Sadly, there is no strength 8 option here akin to the health layer, but this model definitely makes up for it via its special rule, which is the same as the regular Seeker Chariot, and via the sheer number of attacks hitting on 2s. The stratagem is most effective on this model because of the number of attacks. I guess that makes sense. Another important thing to note is that the HQ version of the Exalted Seeker Chariot is significantly more expensive compared to the Health Layer HQ and to the regular Seeker Chariot HQ variants. The smaller two go up by 25 points for the HQ variant, while the Herald on Exalted Seeker Chariot demands a hefty markup of 50 points, up from 80, which is the regular Exalted Seeker Chariot, to 130. It is understandable because relics and warlord traits are insane on the Exalted Seeker Chariot, but 50 instead of 25 is quite the price. Still, the HQ Herald variant with offensive relics and warlord traits, like for example the Slothful Claws and Fatal Caress, is just so strong offensively. Oh, and you can smite on top of everything I just mentioned. I know chariots are not the most competitive unit or anything, but man, I love how offensive they are. They just die very fast, as is tradition with most Slaanesh units. The first table we are going to look at is the number of attacks and the quality of said attacks. As far as I'm aware, you can't look outsir for the Exalted Seeker Chariot, while you should be able to look outsir for the other two smaller variants, so keep that in mind. So, as the table shows, there are a lot of strength 4 attacks that are admittedly not good against anything toughness 5 or higher, but you need to remember that both chariots without the bladed axles still have the Scything Impact special rule going for them, which can add a good chunk of mortal wounds before actually attacking. But if you're playing against a lot of toughness 5 like Custodes, you really only want the Health Layer in my opinion. Any army that runs toughness 4 or lower, which is honestly most armies, make the other two chariot variants viable as well. The ideal target for these chariots are units like Guardsmen or Tau'fire warriors though. You are keeping essential units from shooting while slicing them up. Toughness 4 units will be tougher to crack because of the Lashes of Torment and the Tongs that have no AP. Necron Warriors have a 4+ armor save, while Space Marines have a 3+ armor save, filtering lots of potential damage out. I'm personally a huge fan of the Bladed Axles. If they had a fixed number of attacks, the Health Layer would be so good. But even though the new command reroll reworked to be more specific, it still allows you to reroll the number of attacks with the weapon though. So if you're in the position and you roll the 1 for the number of attacks of the Bladed Axle, it would be worth considering rerolling depending on how important the unit is you are trying to kill in melee. Another thing to take note of is that the Exalted Chariot hits on 2s, as long as it isn't below 7 wounds, which makes its attack 16.6% more likely to hit compared to the other chariot variants, in addition to it having the most attacks. I'll be honest, the HQ variant of the Exalted Seeker Chariot is a lot more expensive, but being able to equip it with the Slothful Claws and giving it the Fatal Caress Warlord trait on top of being able to cast Smite is just a crazy amount of offensive potential. The Herald on Exalted Seeker Chariot basically turns into an attack powerhouse with 8 really strong attacks because of the relic, while also being able to dish out a lot of mortal wounds because of Smite, the special ability, and Fatal Caress. I will calculate this build as well since I like it so much. Alright, before I continue rambling, let's go over more tables and math so you can get a better look at the actual deadliness of the chariots. Alright. The first table we will take a look at will show the deadliness of each chariot variant. The one thing I have no idea how to correctly calculate is scything impact, since it is highly dependent on the situation at hand. I will assume that it will add one additional mortal wound, except versus a single vehicle. So, as you can see, each variant has a very good amount of killiness against toughness 3 or toughness 4 targets. They are able to kill an intercessor or two depending on the variant. The Herald on Exalted Seeker Chariot with the Slothful Claws and Fatal Caress is extremely deadly. 7 dead intercessors from a 130 point unit is pretty good. Meanwhile, it's also able to kill quite a few aggressors, and it even has the potential on average to take out a Storm Speeder, which is quite impressive. What this table fails to show, of course, is the Hellflayer's consistent damage output. The Exalted Seeker Chariot is strong and by raw math, as you can see, better, but as soon as it brackets, it gets incredibly worse than the Hellflayer. So I personally like the Hellflayer because of its consistency. It doesn't bracket, but you need, of course, a little bit of luck when it comes to rolling how many attacks your bladed axles will have. The one thing you also need to notice is that the Hellflayer is the only option you have, except maybe for the Herald on the Exalted Seeker Chariot with this particular build, to kill units that have a high toughness. If your chariot is not able to dish out a ton of mortal wounds like the build I have here, the Hellflayer is your only other option, and for 80 points you really can't go wrong with it. So the main takeaway here is that the Seeker Chariot is good against toughness 3 and toughness 4 units, while also being able to just bind aggressors and basically die in melee, but yeah, preventing them from shooting, which is extremely valuable and potent for just 60 points. Meanwhile, the Hellflayer for 20 points more just has those 6 toughness 4 wounds, the same as the Seeker Chariot, but it is the only option to actually kill toughness 5 and higher units more or less effectively, depending on how well you roll on those bladed axles. The Exalted Seeker Chariot, on the other hand, is best used as a herald, in my opinion. The regular Exalted Seeker Chariot is good, but I don't really see the point of it in a normal heavy support slot. I personally prefer to, equip it with all the relics and warlord traits and make it really, really scary. Instead of just, spending those 80 points, I could instead use for a Hellflayer. That's my personal takeaway when looking at those numbers. Okay, then the last table we will take a look at is how durable these units are. Of course, the Seeker Chariot and the Hellflayer are the exact same. I still separated them just for clarity's sake, while the Exalted Seeker Chariot is also the same with double the amount of wounds, but as always, it can bracket. So, as you can see, they survive quite a few lasgun attacks, as everything does, but as soon as we get to a bolt rifle or an onslaught Gatling cannon, it gets scarier and scarier. Even melta rifles are starting to just, outright kill these things in one turn. So an Eradicator squad can easily take out a chariot each turn, like no problem. So to wrap everything up, here is the conclusion. The Seeker Chariot's best role is to kill low toughness units, as I already said. And if your enemy does not have low toughness units, you will, look at the enemy gun line and pick out the most deadly shooting unit and try to keep it in melee and force it to stay in melee. As long as that's the case, I think the Seeker Chariot will make its points back by just making your other squishy units, like for example Demonette bombs, survive that much longer. Meanwhile, the Hellflayer is your easy auto-include against anything that has a high toughness. For example, if you want to reliably put a few damage points on something like a Demon Russ or a Land Speeder, the Hellflayer is definitely the choice to go with here. The Exalted Seeker Chariot in its regular variant, I don't really see the point of. It is basically a Seeker Chariot that is more deadly, of course, but the fact that it can bracket and it gets worse really, really quickly is not something I'm a fan of normally. I think it is best used with a Herald on top, with Psychic Powers and Slothful Claws and Fatal Caress, to just make it a very, very scary charging unit that can actually kill almost anything it charges. Alright, that's the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you are new here, consider liking and subscribing to not miss any other new videos. If you want to join the community, please look at the links in the description down below. There's a Discord server there if you want to give feedback or video ideas or if you have questions. And other than that, there are Twitter links down there, one for my personal Twitter and one for the Twitter for Empire of War Games if you want to stay updated with what I'm doing right now and potential streams and so on. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next video. Bye bye.